and you alone to make inferences from the evidence in this case. And when the evidence is complete and the evidence is closed, we're going to ask you to do that. This case is entitled The State of Nevada versus Robert Tellis. But let's talk just a little bit about Mr. Tellis. He's a family man, married, 3 children. He's a loving father and husband. He's a self-made man. He applied to our law school here, UNLV, and worked doing air conditioning, HVAC. It's a hard way to make a living, put himself through school. In addition to supporting his family and being engaged at school, he became the president of the University Bar. It's basically the student body president of his law school. He ran his own probate firm for 3 years and was named Pro Bono Attorney of the Year by the Nevada Legal Services in 2016. He ran for the Office of Public Administrator and was elected in 2019. He was determined at that point in time to clean up the office of the Public Administrator's office. He went in that office with a goal and with a mission. And as we had spoken briefly through the process of jury selection, he kind of upset the apple cart. He started eliminating unnecessary overtime. He wanted the office to run more efficiently. In some cases, we had public employees that are paid by our tax dollars reporting 40+ hours per week of overtime. And let me tell you, his changes to this office were not received well, and that created this hostile work environment. As a result of this hostility, reports were made, as they should be. Obviously, our public and our duly elected officials should be looked upon. Comes with the job. In Mr. Gehrman's first report, it states among the changes, Tellis has said he made our closing estate cases faster and cutting back on large amounts of tax-funded overtime employees are getting under Cahill. He provided a document that showed one veteran employee received more than $140,000 in overtime between 2017 and 2018. That was on the top of the employee's combined $150,000 regular salary for those years. The employee overtime dropped to roughly $13,500 in 2020, which you can see is a substantial reduction, according to the document. Nicole Lofton, an estate coordinator for the past year, said the old guard acts like a little gang and has tried to isolate her. Lofton said she has suffered from migraines and from stress. They told me from the beginning to pick a side, she said, adding that Tellis does everything he can to help her succeed while the other group wants her to fail. Again, that was the source. That was the seed of this hostile, allegedly hostile work environment. After being duly elected, Mr. Tellis also began evaluating the ethics of the office's relationship with third-party vendors. And you're going to hear that through the course of this case because perhaps the state wants to make things simpler. This was part of the facts and the evidence from which you will be called upon to draw inferences. He set out to identify the suspicious nature of businesses conducted by outside facilitators of administration operating under the Independent Administrations Act. And we need to just discuss this a little bit because the RJ did a very good job of following up on this and reporting these problems. You have people who die. They don't have wills. They may not have heirs. They may not have estates. And unfortunately for them, their legacy is stolen by these third parties. Generally, if a person dies intestate, it goes to the public administrator's office and they deal with the affairs, which often involves the sale of homes. Under this Independent Administrations Act, there are third parties who would come in, oftentimes with no announcement to the family members, take the properties, devalue the properties, and then turn around and sell them, and then to a straw buyer, and ultimately sell them again and make millions of dollars. Robert Tellis was determined to stop that, regardless of the consequences. What we saw here and what he saw when he began was basically corporate interest over public interest in the state of Nevada. We all experience that every day, from basically the national bird, the cones, to the casinos sucking money out of our society for their own gain. And that was occurring at the public administrator's office when Robert Tellis was elected. In his review, he discovered the public administrator's office had been favoring Compass Realty in the distribution of home sale contracts. Again, he was upsetting the apple cart. He saw this relationship as truly a violation of Nevada law and the code of ethics governing his office. He also discovered that Compass Realty was using the straw buyer again to conduct this business and to hide their activities. It was an inherent conflict of interest, and Mr. Tellis was not going to stand still for this. In March of 2022, Mr. Tellis contacted the duly elected district attorney, Steve Wolfson, and he wanted to report his findings to Mr. Wolfson. Now, Mr. Tellis was an elected official, so was Mr. Wolfson. It's appropriate for Mr. Wolfson to give an audience to Mr. Tellis. He did. Mr. Tellis called him, explained his concerns. Mr. Wolfson put him in contact with a detective, Jappy, a Metro Intelligence officer, who generally investigates public corruption. Mr. Wolfson felt that Detective Jappy could be of assistance to Mr. Tellis in this investigation because Mr. Tellis felt that laws were being broken and people were being stolen from, errors were being stolen from by these third parties. Mr. Tellis accepted this referral and contacted Mr. Jappy. Again, from the Celebite extraction, we have records to corroborate this. Hi, detective, next time you call back, I'm hanging up on anyone else if I'm on a call, because this was very important to Mr. Tellis to get this investigation underway. Mr. Tellis put together a very exhaustive investigative report to expose this corruption. It was sent to Detective Jappy on March 6, 2022, and it names the individuals that Mr. Tellis was primarily concerned about. It contained evidence, it contained exhibits, it contained proof of this corruption that previously his office had turned a blind eye to, and it was the prior guard and ultimately the subsequent guard that went back to the same practices that would concern Mr. Tellis. Mr. Tellis and Detective Jappy agreed to meet and further discuss the possible bribery and the corruption conspiracy that was occurring within his office. Mr. Tellis tried to follow through and is basically saying, hey, we need to get together. I need to provide this information to you and discuss the same. Detective Jappy returns the email, the text, and says, no worries. Again, Mr. Tellis is following up because he wants to expose this corruption. During their meeting, and they ultimately met, Detective Jappy agreed that Mr. Tellis should continue his investigation and that Detective Jappy would assist in building a case of bribery and corruption. And see, the reason this is important, and we will get there as we begin to unfold this story for you, is there became to be some irregularities, which we're going to present to you. And again, you are called upon to make your inferences from the state of the evidence. In reference to one of these three individuals contained within his exhaustive report, Mr. Tellis states, hey, Derek, I'm supposed to have a meeting with this individual and her counsel next week. If you think I try and need to get any specific statements, please give me a call to discuss. He responds, thank you, sir. We'll reach out tomorrow. Detective Jappy initiated his own investigation and began surveillance. So we have police actors, Metro actors now acting as a consequence or as a result of Mr. Tellis's effort. And we have this surveillance that occurs on April 27th, 2022. And this surveillance is conducted because of what Mr. Tellis was doing. Metro Intelligence was getting involved. Because of this involvement and because of this independent investigation that Mr. Tellis had initially begun, the old guard at the public administrator's office began to push back. Oftentimes, as human beings, we're not happy with change, especially when it affects the bottom line of other people. That's what occurred in this office. In addition to their hostility towards the new employees brought in, Rita Reed and her supporters began following Mr. Tellis to dig up dirt on him. They capture images which you saw in the state's opening statement of Mr. Tellis and Miss Lee Kennett getting out of the back of the vehicle and use this to persuade Jeff German to investigate. Now, Jeff German has been in this community for a lot of years, and if he's presented evidence on other side of the equation, he looks into it, and he did as a result of this old guard trying to get rid of Mr. Tellis. During their investigation, and that being the old guard, Rita Reed announces that she will oppose Robert Tellis in the upcoming election for public administrator. 2 weeks after the first article is published, she receives a campaign contribution from Compass Realty and Adam Fenn totaling $10,000. And oftentimes you hear follow the money. Well, that's what Mr. Tellis was asking Detective Jappy to do. At this point in time, and this is curious, and this runs into this murder investigation, Detective Jappy pivots. Initially, he's looking at the true bad actors in this case, but he pivots and begins looking at Robert Tellis, the whistleblower, the person who initiated this investigation and who's trying to bring Metro in to investigate the wrongdoing. Hey, sir, two things. Just wanted to know we are still working on what we've talked about and starting to get a better understanding of what's going on. Second, saw the article today and just want to make sure you're all good. Now, this is in reference to that first article that Mr. Garman wrote. And this is Detective Jappy communicating with Mr. Tellis. Mr. Tellis responds, "Thanks, I'm hanging in there. I'll forward you the truth of the matter. It states that," and that's just how Mr. Tellis was feeling, "the RJ wants to drag me through the mud. I told the reporter everything, but of course that doesn't sell papers." Detective Jappy responds, again, we have May 16th, you'll see at the bottom. "I understand that completely. Sorry you have to go through this, but the truth will always come out and prevail." And through the course of this trial, Mr. Tellis is going to ask for you to be willing to let the truth prevail. This is of concern. Now, on June 23rd, 2022, Kimberly McMahon, a former real estate agent who provided services for the public administrator, reaches out to Alicia Goodwin, the member of the old guard. All right. We have an email indicating that. Again, we have Goodwin, who's part of the old guard, and we have Kimberly McMahon somehow getting involved in influencing Detective Jappy. We have Kimberly McMahon, who is a former real estate agent and officer, wanting to get together and discuss these articles and what's going on in the public administrator's office. This goes so far that on 8/9, Detective Jappy is approached by Ms. McMahon. It's our belief, and we believe this will be disclosed through the course of this trial, that Alicia Goodwin and Rita Reed put her up to this. McMahon states, and I will submit to you that there will be no evidence produced that this is true, but McMahon told Jappy that there is some attempt to receive kickbacks in exchange for real estate listings referred to the public administrator's office. So again, the very thing that he's accusing others of, it's getting turned on him. And we're having Detective Jappy, we have Metro pivoting. And Ms. McMahon gives the formal interview with Jappy. So we're now, again, having this pushback from the old guard as a result of Mr. Tellis's involvement and calling in. I mean, we have this gentleman that's on trial in this case calling in for the assistance of Metro to discover and expose this corruption. This is what's really important. At the time of the alleged solicitation of kickbacks, where she's claiming that that man is soliciting kickbacks from her, so she's kind of got a dual thing going on. At the time, she's a lieutenant for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and also a real estate agent. We're to believe that a public official is trying to solicit bribes from a police officer, and I'd submit to you that the facts will show and common sense will dictate that that's just absurd. This very same public official, Robert Tallis, is the one that conducted his own investigation, his own independent investigation to try and bring Metro attention to this corruption. We're now to believe that this gentleman is actually soliciting kickbacks from a Metro detective. In response to McMahon's statement, Detective Jappy files an application for a pen register and a trap and trace with real-time precision location of Mr. Tellis's cell phone. Now, this is important, and see, this is the crossover and why it's important for you to understand the factual backdrop of all the facts in this case. Mr. Tellis is actually subject to this pen register, this trap and trace device during the time that this murder is allegedly committed by him. See, what happens is in today's modern reality, everything oftentimes boils down to the cell phones. I mean, every second with this, there's messages being sent, there's signals being sent 1,000 times a second to nearby cell towers, ultimately through satellites. I mean, our position and our whereabouts is tracked all the time. So Detective Jappy submits this warrant because we have a privacy right in our phones. He submits a warrant to a judge and gets an order authorizing Mr. Tellis to, in essence, be tracked. Now, this pen register does not capture the content of communications. It doesn't capture the information that's sent via text or otherwise, but it collects what they call the metadata. It gets your location, sometimes within feet. Oftentimes it's in relation to a cell phone tower, but it's more specific than that. You get the data concerning who's calling, who's sending, and who's receiving communications. Again, there's a Fourth Amendment protection, but we don't get into the content of the conversation, but it lets us know, it lets law enforcement know who Mr. Tellis is communicating with, where he's at, in essence, what he's doing in relation to the people that he's in communication with as a result of a cell phone. This is the warrant produced and obtained by Detective Jappy based upon that former, but she was at the time when these solicitations supposedly occurred, was a Metro detective. On the same day, and this is August 17th, Detective Jappy initiates surveillance of Mr. Tellis. We have a surveillance log, August 17th, 2022. So in truth, we have this full pivot that occurs, which is apparently based upon these allegations made by Ms. McMahon at the insistence of the old guard. What's interesting is during this August 17th, 2022 surveillance, you got Mr. Tellis taking care of his family. I mean, he's been away, he's been an official, he's lost his election. I mean, he's going back, focusing on what's important. He's focusing on his family. This surveillance that's being conducted by Metro Intelligence, I mean, they've got him going to Home Depot, picking up food at Chipotle. He's with family, he's home. nothing more. On September 2nd, the tragic murder of Jeff German occurs. But it's important for you to know that this murder occurs with the trap and trace active on Robert Tellis's cell phone. Detective Jappy and Metro captures no cell site location data which would implicate Robert Tellis in the murder of Jeff German. We do know that at some point in that day, there were signals being received and sent, but the cell phone doesn't put Robert Tellis there. He's at home. He's not at home the entire day. Around noon, evidence will be presented to you that he's at a gym working out. And this is after he supposedly commits this murder. Another thing needs to be pointed out is the red and maroon Yukon, the Denali from the surveillance video, is never positively identified. Obviously, the state's going to call upon you to make references. But a DMV search produced 67 possible hits for the vehicle, matching that description. And what's important to note, it's Metro who should be objectively and even-handedly obtaining information, searching for evidence, never follows up on the other vehicles. From the get-go, they're concerned with Robert Tellis and Robert Tellis alone. This is the email confirming, and this is Metro emails concerning the 67 red Denalis that basically match the description of the one that you watched the video of, and that we all watched it together just moments ago. Ms. Weckley did an apt job of laying out the crime scene, and you will see many photos of the crime scene. There's blood everywhere. I mean, this was a stabbing. There's blood in the bushes. There's blood on the ground. There's blood all over Jeff German as he lays dead on the side of his house. The state has shown you, and will show you many more pictures of the DNA that's claimed to have been found under Jeff German's nails. But what's very important, and we'd ask you to take into account all of the evidence or the lack of the evidence in this case, is that no blood whatsoever is found on Mr. Tellis. If this struggle had occurred, it would be reasonable to assume, if it had in fact been Mr. Tellis, that there would have been exchange of blood or of DNA. And there will be a great deal of testimony concerning DNA. Inferences will be made and inferences will be drawn and inferences will be attacked concerning the significance of the state's findings. The shoes that you were shown photos of that were recovered at Mr. Tellis's residence, no blood whatsoever on them. The bag that's found in his garage or in the room, storage room, no blood whatsoever found on that bag. The hat that they claim they found cut up, again, no connection, no tie whatsoever to Jeff German. There is no rational explanation as to why the hat and shoes were cut into pieces, except that it'll probably be easier to conceal and plant. Why else would they be cut up? Why would they be in that strange condition? What's important, again, is there's no blood on them. There's nothing tying those articles that were found in Mr. Tellis's house to Jeff German. A witness provided a statement to police that the killer was spotted in the same outfit days before the murder, acting suspiciously. That was never followed up on. Somebody similarly dressed, similarly clothed, no follow-up, because from the get-go, Robert Tellis was the target of this investigation. What's also important is the cell site location does not place him near that part where the individual matching this description previously was found. I'd also submit to you its significance is this meandering. That was the state's words, the meandering before this attack occurred. There's going to be a claim and an argument made that Mr. Tellis was researching this location, or they believe it was him. Why the meandering if it was him? The washing of the vehicles, and this was important because warrants were based upon this. Mr. Tellis was again subject to surveillance after the date of Jeff German's murder. He's surveilled by Metro Intelligence washing 3 vehicles in front. At that point in time, and again, maybe there's been another pivot, but at that point in time, Metro felt that he was destroying evidence. Maybe he was cleaning up. Reason would make it a reasonable argument, or reason would obviously dictate that if a person is involved in this stabbing and gets into the vehicle, and there's obviously blood, wouldn't there be blood on the vehicle? Wouldn't there be blood on the brakes, on the floor mats, somewhere inside the vehicle? Well, none was ever found. And in fact, this surveillance, and previous to this hearing, issues were made concerning this attempt to conceal evidence. Well, there was no evidence to dispose of. And the surveillance of him washing the outside of these 3 vehicles, and this is on September 6th. This is 4 days later. There's no evidence whatsoever, and no videos, no filming of him trying to conceal any evidence in reference to the subject vehicle or the other 2. I would submit to you that the facts would show, and common sense would dictate that if you were trying to conceal a crime, he wouldn't wash all 3 vehicles. And obviously, he would be concerned with the inside of the vehicle. Now, on this September 6th surveillance, it makes reference to a prior surveillance of Mr. Tellis on September 1st. Again, of no import, of no importance. Again, no evidence inside that vehicle tying Mr. Tellis to any crimes whatsoever. Now, is Mr. Tellis in a position to say who killed Mr. German? No. But I would submit to you the facts will show, in the reasonable inferences that you are to take from the evidence, is that there would be DNA evidence inside that vehicle, on the shoes, on any clothing from Mr. Tellis. A picture was shown of Mr. Tellis's finger, and it'll be argued through the course of this case that that was somehow caused by this murder that occurred. There's no blood left at the scene where Mr. German was murdered either. Nothing, not on the bushes, not on the rocks, not on Mr. German. Mr. Tellis explains that to detectives how we got that wound, but that will come through the course of this trial. What's of concern, and the reason that we've given you this backdrop to give you all the evidence, is somewhat strange behavior on behalf of Mr. Jappy. Now, he's Metro Intelligence. Metro is the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is divided up into various details. Each department has their own responsibilities, their own special training. They work as teams. It's an effective way to conduct investigations. The primary detective in this case, Detective Gaddis, and they work as a team. She was the primary. They work together and they work in a team. You've got the robbery detail that investigates robberies. You've got the financial crimes that investigates financial crimes. You've got Metro Intelligence that generally investigates allegations and facts concerning corruption. But in this case, you've got Detective Jappy inserting himself in this murder investigation concerning Mr. Tellis. In fact, there's an email wherein Jappy implicates Tellis to Gaddis. So early on, we've got Detective Jappy, who obviously previously was directed by this old guard, now pointing the finger at Mr. Tellis to the lead detective in this homicide investigation. During a traffic stop, and this is the significance of Mr. Tellis. See, Metro has a policy that you're to have body cam on, all right? All civilian interactions should be captured because we want to know what the truth is. We want to have an objective record of what occurs. This initial contact with Mr. Tellis occurs on the 7th, and after he's charged and this case begins, repeated requests are made for this body cam. In fact, our judge, I was not on the case at that time, but our judge makes an order on July 18th, 2023 to turn that over. It's learned that over a month after that order is made, that evidence is destroyed. Detective Jappy is also present at the arrest and jumps into the ambulance and rides with Mr. Tellis. Now, it's anticipated that the state is going to argue to you that this suicide is somehow a consciousness of guilt. Apparently, he just couldn't live with himself for a murder that they feel that he committed. I would submit to you in the facts, the reasonable inferences to be drawn from these facts is at this point in time now, Mr. Tellis's life is coming apart. They've been in contact with him. They came into contact with him 2 times on September 7th. The first time they come, they speak to him. They say, we have warrants. He cooperates. They strip him of his clothes. They put him in a white paper suit. They've swabbed his mouth. Obviously, they're investigating him and they're coming down. I would submit to you that a reasonable inference is that there's an attempt by Mr. Tellis to kill himself, not as a difficulty, oh my gosh, I feel guilty for something that they say I did, but his life was coming apart then. It truly was. He'd lost an election. It was giving him an opportunity to go back, be with his family. But now he was getting pressed and charged for a murder of which he's maintained his innocence. There's 3 surreptitious recordings that occur by the homicide detectives. And what's interesting and disturbing to note is Detective Jappy inserts himself into this interview, this surreptitious recording. Talk about another investigation. So again, we have Detective Jappy inserting himself into homicides investigation. I would submit to you a reasonable inference would be that trying to dictate the direction that the homicide investigation is taking. We would submit to you that reasonable minds may disagree or could agree that losing a job is not a motive for murder. Their inference was made, and these tweets, and it's kind of curious now, the age that we live in. I mean, we have presidents that commute via tweets. We have tweets from Mr. Tellis, an elected official, concerning the articles. Wife hears rustling in the trash. Her, honey, is there a wild animal in the trash? Me, no dear, looks like Jeff German going through our trash for his 4th story on me. Smiley face. Oh shoot, I left a pizza box and sushi containers in the trash. In the next article, I'm going to have mob in jacuzzi ties. He's making fun of these. And then you can see the dates, June 18th and June 25th. Again, he's not particularly happy about these articles, but he's reaching out. I mean, he's lost his election. Typical bully, can't take a pound of criticism after sleeving 100 pounds of BS. Up to Article 4 now. You'd think he'd have better things to do. He's addressing these articles in the appropriate way in a public forum. That's what elected officials, regardless if they're high-level, low-level officials, they address as he did previously. He addresses, as you saw, the presentation, the digital presentation after he learned of the articles. He's addressing his constituency. That's what an elected official is supposed to do. That's a reasonable response to criticism, which comes from the job. Again, these articles were not a motive for a murder. And we all know killing a journalist does not kill a story. Killing Jeff German does not kill the investigation or the stories concerning Mr. Tellis. One would think the reporting is heavy on that. One can imagine what it would be for a murder. obviously if one's concerned about negative reporting, one doesn't want to commit a murder because obviously reporting is going to be far more severe. Mr. Tellis was a lawyer prior to this, and he was on his way back becoming a lawyer. However, we do have a predatory corporation losing millions of dollars as a result of his whistleblowing, which he engaged in. He was consistent. Even after he was voted out, he was communicating with Detective Jaffe. He wanted to right these wrongs as he was exiting the office. There were others that had far more motive to make it look like he was the killer and to conduct this killing, because Jeff German was a good reporter. He would ultimately get to what the truth was and what was really going on in that office and with these third-party vendors. Killing an investigative journalist, there's no more follow-up information concerning these millions of dollars when the old guard is now put back into place. German's gone now. I mean, Jeff German did a good job of digging and finding things. We've all heard about him. We all know him. We all respected him. He would take on tough opponents, dangerous opponents. Jeff German was no stranger to making people upset. He made a lot of people, far more able people, far more violent people upset with him. He often had people threatening him. In fact, there was proof of it found on his devices. He was known for the boldness of his inquiries, taking on corrupt and violent targets through the course of his investigative journalism. It came with his job, and it's unfortunate that we no longer have him.
Stop lying to people. Whoever the guy was that wrote that article the other day, you need to fire his ass. Stop lying to people. We're coming for your ass. We are watching you motherfuckers. You better fire that son of a bitch. I'm coming down there tomorrow, motherfucker.
Jeff German received this threat shortly, months before his murder.
You guys just did some propaganda shit out about fucking just for Biden, you fucking piece of shit. You left-wing fucking faggot, fucking socialist, fucking dead motherfuckers. You guys will pay in the end, motherfuckers. You fucking cheated and lied. You guys fucking lied and cheated. And then you went out fucking only fucking box of shit, motherfuckers. Just talk to you, you piece of shit, you motherfuckers. You made the Republic fight again, and you guys are fucking dead motherfuckers someday, motherfuckers.
The defense, and again, that's why we had our founding fathers had this wisdom. The defense can't prove if any of those gentlemen did this. We're not saying they did. We don't know. But there's a bigger picture. I don't know what investigative steps at all were taken to follow up on these two threats that we know of close in time to Jeff German's murder. State could say this is the lunatic fringe, this is to be disregarded, but nonetheless, when you have objective fact finders, when you have people that are truly in search of the truth, you should investigate all avenues. Keeping the burden where it should be on the state. And at the close of this case, we are going to ask you to return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
Okay, at this time we will break for lunch. During this recess, you're admonished not to discuss or communicate with anyone, including your fellow jurors, in any way regarding the case where it's been by voice, phone, email, text, internet, or other means of communication